So here we are, part one. So I was 18 when I decided to go to America. I had been working in a coal mine in central Queensland. I had a job for Cook's Construction way back and got my first job as a truck driver driving those huge haul trucks. And I think it was about a 3-month contract at the time. So it gave me enough money to save up to travel overseas. I've always wanted to travel overseas. I've watched all the movies from the 80s. Living in a small town in central Queensland, we just lived on movies. We had a blockbuster, not a blockbuster, but just an independent theatre, and then that closed down, so we had the video van. So I lived my life through movies, worked at the coal mine, and America for me was always a massive draw card. Growing up on the Goonies and E.T. and all of that was incredible. So after 3 months, it was a very short contract at the mine. It was the first time that mine ever put on locals, and I was fortunate enough to get a job as a truck driver. Saved up my money, and after night shift, I went over to Billawheeler and purchased a return ticket to LA. I can't tell you how excited I was, because back then you used to get a plane ticket. You used to get a physical ticket and it got sent to you. And I was very excited knowing in 6 weeks I was going to be in America. I did apply for a working holiday in Canada, and that also came through really quickly. So over the next 6 weeks, I can't remember what happened. I was just excited, ready to go. And packed up, sold my car, sold everything. But I figured I was only going to be gone, I thought, roughly between 6 and 12 weeks. I had $10,000 in traveller's checks. This will come into play later, the good old traveller's checks. And I'm talking about the days before internet, before mobile phones were around. But there was no handy cards or anything like that. You traveled with traveller's checks and a credit card. I did have a credit card. So I had $10,000 in traveller's checks. My flights over to LA, my flights back, and I was going to wing it from that point. So I boarded the plane, and my first stop was going to be Auckland, New Zealand. And my dad is originally from New Zealand, so I had family there, and I was going to stay with my grandfather. At the time, my grandmother had Alzheimer's and was in a home. I found out the year before that I had a half-sister, so this was going to be the first time also meeting a half-sister, and I also had some cousins that I hadn't had a lot of contact, but it was going to be my first stop, and I was going to be there 10 days. So I arrived in to New Zealand. I went over to my grandfather's house. I think I was 18. I stayed with Granddad for the majority of the time, and I met my half sister. That was the first time I ever met her. I only got told at 18 that we had a half sister. So it was an incredible meeting. She came over to my grandfather's house. She actually had 2 kids, and we went for a walk around the park. Incredibly lovely girl. Yeah, she was a really lovely girl. And again, I stayed with my grandfather. It was great spending time with him. I've always been a good cook. I learned to cook at a very young age. I think it's a unique quality that people should learn more, especially young people, especially young men. I implore them to learn cooking. So I used to cook for my grandfather every day. I'd have to walk about 2 kilometers to the store, and I hung out with my sister, and my cousin came and got me, and we had a night out in the town. I stayed in New Zealand about 10 days, and it was a lot of fun. It was incredibly humbling getting to know Joanne. And look, my father and Joanne didn't get off to the best start, but I think they were building a relationship, and it was great to spend time with my grandfather. I hadn't spent a lot of time with that side of the family because they lived overseas. And so I stayed there, and then I was off on the next leg. In saying that, my grandfather was really sad when I was leaving, and what I wouldn't know is that would be the last time that I ever saw Granddad, and it's also the last time that I ever saw Joanne. Unfortunately, about 2 years later, Joanne was planning on moving to Australia, and she passed away in an accident. She actually had an asthma attack in a pool, and she drowned. Yeah, and that was it was incredibly tough, and yeah, I think about her a little bit, and yeah. Anyway, and I remember the afternoon when I was leaving. I think sometimes old people know, and Granddad was he was a big man. He was really upset, and I'd never seen him cry, and he gave me a hug, and he always called me son, and he said, son, I'll see you. And I remember walking around the back to get the ride to the airport, and he used to drink Drambuie, and I asked, I can't remember who drove me, but I went and got a bottle of Drambuie and dropped it back to Granddad, gave him another hug, and again, it's the last time I ever saw him. So I was off to LA. I jumped on the plane, and my first stop was Tahiti. Thought that was pretty cool. Not cool in the sense that it was cool, it was damn hot. Got off the plane, but I always thought, hey, I've touched Tahiti. On the plane a few hours later, and off to LA. I was very excited. I had a hotel booked in Hollywood, and when you're sitting in a small town in central Queensland, LA was Beverly Hills and Hollywood. That's what LA was. So I had a hotel booked in Hollywood. I think it was West Hollywood. And on that flight over, I got incredibly sick. I got some sort of flu, and I just, when you start to feel yourself going down, well, that's what it was like. So by the time I got into LA, I had an unbelievable fever. I was trying to make my way through customs, and what I hadn't realized, I hadn't been watching the news, that LA was under siege. So as I got through customs, cleared customs, and then got outside and tried to get into a taxi, there was buzz that LA was not a safe place to be at this time, because I arrived on the second day of the Rodney King riots, where every part of Los Angeles, it felt like, was on fire. I remember sitting in a taxi and asking the taxi driver, hey, I've got this is where my hotel was, could you take me there? And he said, absolutely not. That's one of the most dangerous places you could possibly be, and it was no way of getting there. And I said, where else could I go in LA? And he said, get on a plane and get out of this city. So I was already sick. I didn't know where to go. So I walked back into the terminal, and no mobile phone. I had a girlfriend staying with some friends of a friend up in Seattle, but I didn't know where Seattle was. So I jumped on the phone, called them. I sounded incredibly sick, and I said, look, I'm in LA, I can't get anywhere. They were very gracious and said, jump on a plane and come up to Seattle. So I walked over to Alaskan Airlines and bought a ticket, and a couple hours later I was on a plane heading north to Seattle. And you got to understand, I knew a little bit about America, but I had no clue where I was going, who I was going to meet. My first plan had buggered up, in the sense, if you ever look up the Rodney King riots and how LA was destroyed in those few days, I didn't realize how dangerous of a situation I was in. So I landed in Seattle and was picked up by a friend. Stay tuned for part 2.